of the American Society of Civil Engineers. We have three amazing speakers with us for today's webinar. We have Amy Bunzel, the Executive Vice President of Architecture, Engineer, and Construction Solutions at Autodesk. Jay Mezer, Vice President of Digital Delivery at McDonald. And Tom Smith, the Executive Director, longstanding Executive Director of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So today's webinar is entitled Closing the Gap, Building Smarter Infrastructure with Better Information. So for those of you who don't know me, at one point in time, I owned several companies, founded and owned several companies, one of which was called Data Smarts. So the topic of data is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to have this conversation today. But since the days when I had that company, we now have much, much larger quantities of data available to us. We have better quality data, and we have a wide variety of tools that digest all those data. So today we're going to really focus in on turning those data into information. How do we use this vast array of data that's coming at us all the time and use it to deliver the best projects in the best possible ways. So we're going to do I'm going to conduct some question and answer periods with the speakers, but I want you to start formulating your questions. You'll have the opportunity throughout the webinar to put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll save about 15 minutes at the end of our conversation to hopefully address many, if not all, of your questions. And I'll remind you a couple of times during the webinar as well. So we are going to start with a question that I'm going to toss out to all of our speakers. So I've asked them to give kind of lightning answers to these questions. Earlier this year, ASCE released our 2025 infrastructure report card. It gave an overall grade of C for the 18 combined categories of infrastructure that we evaluate. So, in your opinion, what are one or two of the most pressing challenges that we're facing in infrastructure today? And I'd like to start with Amy.
Thanks, Marcia. It's great to be here and welcome everyone. So, you called it out really in your introduction. There's an abundance of data out there, but it's of varying qualities, it's in varying locations, it's structured and unstructured, and it's kind of hard to wrangle in a way that will give the agencies the information they need to make decisions. So I think one of the challenges is the types of decisions that we need to make are getting coming faster and more furious with things like extreme weather events and aging infrastructure. So really closing those data gaps will help teams out there make smarter, evidence-based decisions, get the most they can out of every dollar they're investing in their communities.
Great. I totally agree. Thank you. Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Amy said. Definitely the challenges of an aging system. I think even with all the recent investments, I think we're still in catch-up mode, addressing visible failures rather than making proactive life cycle based decisions. That's one, and then I think definitely the data point of how we manage information, how we prioritize investments based on the best available data that we have. I just want to quote one of the recent studies by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. They said that losses are more than $15 billion per year just due to poor data interoperability and fragmented information systems.
Wow.
So that tells a really good story on the importance of the data behind it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those insights, Tom.
Yeah, I would certainly echo Amy and Jay's comments. And this is sort of been something we've had these challenges for many years. We've been doing this report card since 1998, and we've seen some progress. As you mentioned, Marcia, we're up to the C grade now, but it was earlier in the D grade. But we've seen a lack of investment over many decades. Since the report card started in 1998, we still have not seen anywhere near the level of investment that we need. I think our current report card showed $7 trillion needed over the next 10 years. And at the same time, we're seeing this increase in extreme weather events, so the need for resilient infrastructure. And a lot of our infrastructure was designed by a prior generation and sort of different conditions in terms of the number of people that use it, as well as the environmental conditions associated with it. We have workforce shortages that we have to be concerned about, and that's why this discussion is so important as we talk about adding efficiencies with data and technology. And then cybersecurity is another thing I think is another particular concern and challenge for us, and vulnerability I think that we face in the United States and many other countries as well. But that's another area I think that we have to be worried about.
Agreed. Yeah. I'm a recovering elected official. And so I appreciate all the comments that you made about infrastructure, particularly new infrastructure that we need. But I think, in another insight is the maintenance of the infrastructure that we have. And unfortunately, elected officials, and I try not to include myself in this particular category, but they like ribbon cuttings a whole lot more than they like other activities. They're not as excited about maintenance as they are about something new and shiny. So we have that battle to fight as well as we try to make good decisions about investing in infrastructure. Maybe data will help us change that a little bit. Tom, I wanted to ask you, despite the C grade, our report card includes examples of progress we've made, but gaps that we have. How do you think technology and data are going to help us to close those gaps over the next decade or so?
Yeah, absolutely. We have shown progress as you mentioned, Marcia, and we're happy about that. We saw a number of grades increase. We saw 8 of the 18 categories go up, and that's great. But we still have 9 categories in the D range, and so we have this gap that we've got to close. And as we talk about workforce shortages, I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We know that technology can help us to try and close that gap with the work that needs to be done, and also with the grades that we're seeing, and to make to get more out of the existing infrastructure that we have, and to extend its life cycle sometimes. But that also includes the maintenance function that you mentioned is so important for us. With our report card solutions, we had really 3 that we talked about. We talked about sustained investment. We talked about prioritizing resilience, and that included using sort of asset management and life cycle assessment, all of which really requires technology and data management to do that effectively. And then thirdly, we had advanced policy and innovation. And so that included ensuring that there's reliable data that's collected and released to the public frequently regarding the condition, capacity, operation, maintenance, safety, and resilience of our infrastructure systems. So how can technology help? I think it can help us by optimizing planning and design for cost, resilience, and sustainability. It can help us with more efficient procurement and permitting processes. I know in Virginia here in the Commonwealth, we've got a really enhanced digitized permitting process. In fact, we're going to be talking about that next week. We have a team from Ukraine that's going to be here, and we have some folks from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality that'll be doing an update on that. But we can also technology can help us with enhanced openness and transparency in this procurement and the management processes. It can help improve construction productivity, extend the life of existing infrastructure. So I think AI is certainly going to be part of that. ASCE just released last month a couple of new AI tools that I think will help make engineers more effective. One is called Eves, that helps practitioners with specific project questions based on the ASCE standards on our Amplify digital website, our digital standards website. And then we have another tool called Corey, which helps to answer questions based on shared advice from our Collaborate community. So I think there's a lot of ways that technology is going to make us more efficient. And some of those we also showcased in our Future World Vision platform and the Cities of the Future film that we did in IMAX Theater. And so I think there are lots of opportunities with technology for us.
Right. Thank you for that robust answer, Tom. Appreciate all the insights. So, Amy and Jay, I want to toss the next one over to you guys. What are the biggest barriers to getting the right data to the right people at the right time? Amy, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, one of the challenges is that many agencies still rely on paper-based workflows. So the data is siloed, inaccessible, hard to share, not always up to date with what people have out in the field. And so the good news is it's possible today to transition to connected cloud-based workflows where you've got all your data on a project stored in a common data environment, and then you can manage and control who has access to what data and what they can do with it. And so that enables you to really make sure that everyone in a project has access to the information. You can involve all your stakeholders in critical decisions. And I'll share a real world example because I think it's important to acknowledge this stuff exists and is helping today. So in Ohio, our customer Arcadis was modernizing about 20 toll booths, so over 1,000 miles of roadway. And if you could imagine doing this in the summertime, we all know how fun road construction is. They were able to come in on budget, actually under budget and early, and reduce project risks and improve productivity of the people working on the project by 25% because everyone was working off of common data environment. And when they had to make changes due to weather or other conditions, everyone on the project team was able to contribute, leverage that data and information to really drive the project to a huge success. So it is great to see that this type of capability is already taking off and having an impact today.
Oh, what a great example. Thanks for that. Jay, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few barriers to get the right data to the right people at the right time. I think the biggest one is definitely the fragmented data systems. Right now, a lot of the data sits on different systems. There's inconsistent standards. And then there's also a little bit of a cultural resistance to change. Change management is a big part of it. So we see critical information often, sitting in different platforms, spreadsheets, like Amy said, on paper, emails, and it makes it hard to establish like a single source of truth. So interesting industry research that was published last year said like we spend 19% of our time searching for information across multiple platforms, and then engineers lose an extra additional like 10 to 15% of their time reconciling these data sets because they're so specific between platforms. So even if the data is there, it's frequently siloed and not properly structured. I think the other barrier also is information requirements. We're starting to see a lot of agencies set information requirements as to how it should be managed, stored, and then disseminated. But it's still something that's evolving. Obviously, a lot of teams gather an enormous amount of data, but without clearly defining what information is needed by who and when, and it could be a volume instead of value. And then finally, it's the responsibility of the data quality also and governance that is still a bit of a barrier. So information, cannot be reliable unless it's really managed with a purpose. So those are
Indeed.
the top two that I see.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think as you're talking about data and formats and discrepancies or things that need to be reconciled, people think that it's I'll say exotic parts of the data stream. But in reality, we have a member who brought us an example of just the date, in a record and how, across all of the different platforms that we're using, there were no two that had the same date structure. Something as simple as that is really not so simple. So these more sophisticated data streams that you're talking about, we really have to be thoughtful about those data structures. So Amy, I want to come back to you for just a minute, please. How are the digital solutions changing the way project information is managed and shared, and why is that so important?
Well, I think the biggest thing is also what Jay and I just spoke about is having that sort of single source of truth or sort of set of data of record on a project, and that enables all the stakeholders to contribute based on their expertise. I would say the other important thing that's changing over time is that these common data environments they're not siloed. They connect through APIs to other environments like Microsoft Power Automate and other tools that people within an ecosystem might use. So you're really freeing the data to be used in multiple different environments, which is a great benefit of creating that common data environment and having that source of truth. The other great thing that happens is as you start to build up a repository of data on multiple projects or across the life cycle of a project, you can start to use AI to identify insights or trends, use it to query your projects, and really gain information in ways that you wouldn't have been able to connect previously with all the siloed data in the past. So those environments help you while you're working on the project, but also they help you when you hand over from design to operations. And so we have a lot of customers. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport is a great example where they've been gathering sort of condition assessments, asset management information. So they're starting to get a real-time picture of everything they have going on in the airport so they can figure out how to do predictive maintenance and identify new projects and track them in similar ways.
Jay, I think you have some experience in this AI realm and this data world. Do you have any thoughts on what Amy just shared with us, particularly about AI?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're seeing a lot of industry transition, like in terms of AI, is happening in like more of a targeted, practical phase. Um, early adoption include using LLMs for like automated quality checks. One great example that I've seen recently is using AI to cross check between as built drawings and the specs to be able to find information real quickly so that operation and maintenance teams can access the right information at the right time whenever they need it. And this has proved to cut like manual efforts by 20 to 30% of finding the relevant information that is needed. We're also seeing some scenario analysis when it comes to scheduling in terms of using AI, and in some instances predictive maintenance. Again, I mean, right now there's a lot going on with targeted AI solutions, but I'm seeing it more like an assistive capability that will strengthen engineering judgment rather than replacing it. It's not what everyone is saying. It's going to take away all the jobs. So
Right.
that's what
It's
we're seeing right now.
it's a
Yeah, if
tool in
I
our
could
tool
add
belt,
there a
right?
little bit, Marcia,
Please, yes,
I
please,
think
Amy.
that the human in the loop is something that we believe in very much so for many reasons. But I think one is just the importance of everything that the people on this call are building and the need to really have that expertise and be augmented by the AI, but not replaced by the AI. And so we think about AI on a spectrum. There's sort of the task-based automation, which is the equivalent of what, used to be like a spell checker previously, or, comparing two documents or, understanding where you might have outliers from your spec. And then there's sort of workflows. So connecting different things that someone might do and making suggestions and giving you maybe alternatives to what you might be working on. And then there's more like systems where then you're really getting into something that's more generative and more doing of a lot of the heavy lifting. But in each case, we're building in places where there is a human in the loop and someone to really validate, verify, and optimize and adjust. Because we don't think the AI is going to give you maybe the answer. It will give you an answer, and then maybe that spurs some additional thought or creativity on your part. So you've got to be able to adapt and move on from what the original suggestions are. But it's definitely a continuum. I mean, we're in the early days of understanding what this stuff
Absolutely.
is truly going to be good at.
Yeah. I mean, when all the Autodesk tools started in the beginning of time, you know, those tools were also perhaps a little scary to some. They were powerful, that there was not the clear understanding of what its role, what its role was in the process, and that has evolved over time. And I think you're right that AI is in that place right now where we're all using it as a tool as it should be and figuring out how the human and machine interact. And for those who heard Jay earlier but weren't sure, LLMs are large language models. So just for those who may not be familiar with that term. I want to pivot to Tom for a moment. You know, you mentioned earlier and others in the conversation have talked a little bit about workforce, the people part of this. So can you talk to us a little bit about what ASCE is doing to support both skills training as well as focusing on attracting new talent into civil engineering?
Yes, absolutely. And I also mentioned, because it ties to AI workforce and AI there's certainly a relation, but on the AI front, we've been really, as you know, Amy referenced the validated verified content, and that's where ASC has really come into play, where we've got this digitized content that goes back to the 1800s, all of which has been really validated and verified at a very high level. So when you talk about AI, there's sort of trustworthy AI that you have to be concerned about as engineers and ethical responsibilities. And ASC really has a very strong role to play there. And Amy knows, we've had a bunch of meetings with Ishmael, and he spoke at our annual conference. And we've been really trying to talk about ways that we could sort of use some of that data and get it out there and more in practice. And the two platforms we just released, I think, are going to help us do that also with our standards and our peer-reviewed journals and things like that as we go to the next level. With workforce, I think as far as workforce, almost everything ASC does is about developing workforce. We recognize there are major workforce challenges. If you look at some of the data from like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. Census Bureau, American Society of Engineering Education, we're really looking at 30% of civil engineering workforce demand being unfilled by 2033. And then I know the ACEC Research Institute, they've got a study out from the workforce of the future, and the U.S. engineering workforce faces a net shortage of about 18,000 engineers annually. So we know we have a challenge, and we've got to hit that at the pipeline, and we've got to develop the pipeline and we've got to retain engineers, civil engineers, when they come into the profession. So we've been working very hard on that. And Marcia, I know you've been on the speaking circuit on this topic, and you could talk for hours on just this one topic alone. But we have a task committee on transforming our workforce that was created, and it was headed up by Maria Lehman, who's the new interim executive director. She'll be taking over for me as I retire at the end of this year. So they did a wonderful report. Our board just approved an implementation plan at the last board meeting, and we've got a focus on pipeline and pathways, a focus on recruitment and retention, a focus on skills development, education, and advancement. So the goal is to really broaden access to civil engineering, and it also improve the workplace culture, enhance the professional competence through partnerships and initiatives like the Engineering Workforce Consortium. That's something we engaged in ASCE with American Council of Engineering Companies, as well as the American Public Works Association. So we've been very busy on this topic. Our Mosaic, our Members of Society Advancing an Inclusive Culture, that's a committee that's done a lot of work in this area also, is making sure that we have a diverse profession. ASC's got members in 177 countries and lots of different cultures, and we making sure that we're connecting all of those and really embracing everybody in this profession. And so our Mosaic team has done a wonderful job of that. They just got a new grant from the United Engineering Foundation. They're going to be holding another summit this year. We did one last year as well on workforce. So we've got a whole committee restructuring that's taking place, developed around workforce. Again, Marcia can talk about that because she's done webinars on that topic as well. We actually restructured our staff team as well. We've got a managing director who's really focused on workforce. So there's a whole lot happening in this area, but at some level, I would say almost everything we do at ASCE, it's about bringing people into this pipeline, developing them throughout their career, and certainly retaining them as civil engineers.
Indeed, yeah. When I read the task committee report, one of the factoids that jumped out at me was that women still only represent nominally
14%.
15,
Yeah.
14% of the civil engineering profession. If only we tapped into that resource a little bit better, I think that gap could start to shrink. Obviously, we need everybody to be interested in civil engineering, but we still, as a woman, we're still underrepresented in the workforce, and so maybe with women in leadership will catch the attention of more young women who say, if I see it, I can be it. I want to pivot now back to Jay for a minute. So you work on some very complex projects in your daily life. One example is the Sound Transit project in Seattle. Talk to us a little bit about how connected data has maybe changed the way you approach these very complex projects. what are you doing differently? What do you think is better about and what better outcomes are you having with these projects?
Sure. I mean, again, we're using this word quite a bit, but I think creating that single source of truth across the owner, designer, contractor, and stakeholders has been one of the most critical goals. As you know, these mega infrastructure programs go on for many years, and usually we see a lot of technology evolution during the planning and design of these programs. But recently, over the past few years, with the common data environments and the ISO standards tagged to it, a significant improvement has been made, and it really has reduced like manual processes of sharing files and data and information, and improve things like version control, eliminate uncertainty
Mhm.
about which information is current. You mentioned, the example about the file dates and version control, and especially on mega infrastructure programs where like multiple scenarios are evaluated, and sometimes you have to revert back to an option that was designed 3 years ago. And what does that mean? What are the impacts? So having visibility to that data in a well managed CDE or common data environment improves that visibility across designers, whether this alignment or structure, utilities, stations, systems, and then facilitates that integration of all these different disciplines into one model that allows you to coordinate and validate the design. So that's the first one. I think coordination across multiple contracts and packages is much better managed with these common data environments. In any given program, you have multiple contract packages usually, and they can get very focused on what the needs are for these contract packages, but having the ability to aggregate all of them into one place where you can validate interfaces and then make sure everybody understands what are the issues is really important. We saw also that early constructability review has been really beneficial. So having all the data in one place allows us to capitalize and materialize like some of the ideas related to 4D modeling and constructability, linking the schedule to a model to look at early constructability, identify gaps, exposing, any issues with access, staging, and sequencing, and finding those risks. And then, it's definitely improving the confidence in the data to allow better decision making process related to cost, schedule, and then help how teams visualize those complex designs. And then finally, it really begs the question as to how are we handing over the information once construction is complete. If you're starting your project from day one with a really proper information management requirement, setting up the common data environment, how all the teams work together, the topic is going to come up. What are we going to do with all this information once the project is completed, and how are we going to use it in operations and maintenance?
Hmm. Yeah, excellent. We have about 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to remind everybody, we have a few questions in our Q&A right now, but if anybody else has a question they want to tee up, now is a good time to put it into the Q&A box. Amy, did you want to add anything to what Jay was saying?
Yeah, I think Jay made a lot of comments about kind of newer projects, but one of the other places where data plays such an important role is understanding how to optimize your budget for the highest impact areas you might want to work on. So a great example is the city of Fayetteville, North Carolina. They had a lot of flooding problems in their city, more than their budget could allow them to deal with. So they were able to use a lot of digital collaboration and simulation tools to really understand, which projects would impact, most of the population and would have the biggest impact on environmental protections. And so, using their budget, they were able to leverage all this information to manage to save about a $24 million benefit over 10 years by reducing flood risk and property damage. And then, that just continues. So you're working on, the highest risk, highest impact items as you go through managing your budget.
Oh, that's an excellent example. I hadn't heard about that before. That's a great use of this intelligence that
Mm-hmm.
you're building through these data sources and the tools that help you manage them. That's great. So we briefly touched on funding earlier in this. So I want to pivot back to Tom to talk a little bit about funding and why public funding for infrastructure really matters, and how can data, the data tools that we have now really help us. Amy just gave a bit of an example, but what other thoughts do you have about funding and data and tools, et cetera?
Yeah, this is always the key question is, how do we pay for it? I mean, we first have to make sure everybody understands the importance of our infrastructure and then figure out that it really does require, there's a bill. It's not free and we have to continue to pay for it. And by the way, that bill is actually higher if we fail to pay for it because, when you fail to invest in your infrastructure and you have to mitigate problems down the road, there are studies showing it can cost up to $13 more for, the dollar that you would otherwise spend up front. So, there's a real financial incentive to do it right and to pay it up front instead of paying it more at the back end. As I mentioned, with our report card, and we've done economic studies on this, through 2033, we show a $3.7 trillion investment gap for all these different 18 categories of infrastructure. So we just have failed to maintain our infrastructure that at the level that it requires, and it costs us in the long run. We pay this hidden tax. Every family pays the hidden tax when we fail to invest in our infrastructure. So it's certainly something that we try to make sure that everybody understands. It's usually a bipartisan issue, but nevertheless, people don't like to have new taxes, and ultimately, when you pay for infrastructure, you usually need taxes or you need user fees. There's private, we look at federal, state, local, and private monies that help pay for our infrastructure, but we really need all of those as part of the tools that we utilize for this. And then, of course, technology is so important for like the conversation that we're just having here, as we're looking at life cycle costs. And we have to, not just worry about cutting ribbons up front and what it costs up front and trying to get the lowest possible price up front, because that's really, very short-term thinking. That we need to have long-term thinking because, we're not, in fact, we really ought to be thinking about not just our own generation, but future generations, because a lot of the infrastructure that we're designing is going out 50, 75, or 100-year life cycle durations for the things that are being designed. So we really have to have a longer-term outlook, and then look at this as an asset that has to be managed over time. And then that's where this data is so important, and the technology is so important, because we can, real-time sensors and really seeing how it's performing so we can maintain it. There's a lot of tremendous savings that can be utilized in all the different, planning, design, building, operating, maintaining. So I think technology is a huge factor here to help us to save dollars and to do it more efficiently and effectively.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to pivot to a couple of questions from the audience, and then I have some closing questions I'm going to come back and ask our panelists. So the first question that we have is for Amy. How does Autodesk balance the need for interoperability with its own platform strategy? And what steps are being taken to support open standards?
That's a really important way to unlock the value of data within the industry, is to make it far more interoperable. And so we are working with our competitors. We're working with standards groups like IFC to enable data to flow more seamlessly. We're also working with our own data and making it more granular, so that as you're trying to import or export or share information, you're able to share just the piece of information that you need to with your partner in a whole variety of formats. So it's really for us about being open, adopting standards, and also being more granular. So you're not having to share these monolithic pieces of information with people who don't even need half of that data.
Great, thank you. And let me just, there's another question that I think ties in with this, if I can just add another little piece to this. So there was a question about mobile field workflows. A lot of the data is collected or reported from the field. So what kinds of things are happening at Autodesk to help uh, Autodesk and or other tools be more efficient and less dependent on that desktop environment?
Yeah, it's an interesting continuum, because there's on the design side you end up with a lot of like focused usage on the desktop, but as you get further and further down into the construction life cycle, you have common data environment, cloud shared data, and then you have people in a trailer, but you also have a lot of people on the ground, on the job site, looking right at what, at what they need to comment on or work on. So we are working on making sure that every stakeholder has an experience that works for them. So for example, in the field, we need to make it easier to submit RFIs, for AI to be able to know what you're trying to do and make it easier so that you're not having to, type a bunch of things even into your phone. So there's a huge opportunity for ease of use and streamlining and connecting data all the way, I think, from design out through to construction and then from the, construction job site to the people managing the project. So I would say it's an area of active development, not just by Autodesk, but a place that's going to have a big impact for the industry.
Sure. Yeah. I heard somebody the other day say something about, years ago when these boxes were, and can't, there we go.
Yes.
When these boxes were first delivered to all of us, they were phones that had some other functions. And now almost nobody makes phone calls. We're walking around with the computers in our hand. And, I'm from the generation where the computer was the size of a floor of an office building.
Yep.
And now I'm carrying something more powerful in my hand. So it's quite the revolution in my career cycle. Tom, I'm going to ask a question following up on the cybersecurity that you mentioned. What strategies are you seeing, are you hearing to address all the threats? When you talk about data, there are millions and millions of attacks every day on people who have valuable data. So what are you hearing about cybersecurity?
Yeah, and I'll quickly also mention, just following up on Amy's earlier comments, that I was just seeing an email exchange just a couple of days ago with Steve Murphy at Bechtel. I'm sorry, at Boeing, and he was talking about authoritative digital data, also known as model-based definitions, and how they've utilized that within Boeing, and how the amount of savings that it's had over time. And our Industry Leaders Council is actually looking at future topics that they think that they should be addressing, and the ASCE should be addressing. And that is one of the ones on the list that's being sort of evaluated right now. And so I think it kind of relates to some of the comments that Amy was making. Yeah, on the cybersecurity part, I will say that we've been hearing a lot about that also within the National Academy of Construction, and we're holding a summit on March the 19th in conjunction with the National Academy of Engineers, which you're a member of, Marcia, as well as funding from the United Engineering Foundation. In fact, I have a call later today with planning for that. So the idea is to bring together a lot of all the different engineering disciplines, not just civil, but all, electrical, mechanical, et cetera, and really have a convening. And the idea is to really talk more about having a standard of care associated with cybersecurity. And I know Lucian Niemeyer, who's really spearheading this, a lot of his focus has been trying to get this almost a separate degree really focused really in on cybersecurity. And there's just so much there that needs to be studied and evaluated, and then training that's necessary. So March 19th, there'll be something further on that, but we'll have more information to share on our website.
That's great. Yeah, I think I remember back in the days of the preparation for the 1996 Olympic Games here in Atlanta. It was the first time, camera systems were being installed on the highways, and a lot of data, were being processed. And there was a lot of concern. Our traffic signal systems were being connected. A lot of concern about what happens if somebody finds that right hole in the system and shuts our traffic systems down. So this is a problem that's been around for a long time. I think it's just getting more complex because there's so much more to deal with. So I think conversations like the one you just referred to are really important for us to really wrap our heads around cybersecurity for these large data sources.
And there's just so many vulnerabilities in that process. As you mentioned, you got the weakest link in a long chain of a connected system. And so there's a lot to be concerned about. And some of these are technology related, but some are just human related. Just things. And so a lot of us are seeing this in our workplace, every day, where we're trying to protect from a lot of the phishing, emails and things that are happening. And there's a lot of vulnerabilities. And part of it is, developing a culture and making sure that everybody's aware of what these challenges are, and everybody's on the alert and part of the solution.
Indeed. So true. So true. So, one of the other questions that came in, so we've talked a lot about the technical side, the technology side. Let's just pivot for a second and talk a little bit about the policymakers. Is there something, and I'm going to toss this out, any one of you can answer. Is there one thing that you wish policymakers understood better about all the implementation of technology? An issue you've been grappling with. Is there anything out there?
I can start with that one. I think
Please.
what's important is that the technology exists today for us to do, to build infrastructure projects using digital tools. And to Tom's point, that will make them more sustainable, more resilient, more secure for the future. And so there's no reason not to be mandating when public funds go out that projects are done, using modern tools and technologies.
That would be great. That'd be great. And I travel a lot, as you can imagine, with my role at ASCE, and I do find a challenge. I find, and this is a very broad generalization. I know there are many exceptions to the rule, but the coastal areas, East Coast, West Coast, tend to be a little bit more plugged into the use of technology. Middle America, not quite as much. So I think we also have some challenges to address to really elevate those who have not yet had the opportunity to come to the party and take advantage of some of these tools. I know there are users in Middle America, but I think it's much more uh, kind of part of everyday life from my experience in visiting people across the country. So I don't know if you're having similar experiences, but I think that we also have that kind of challenge is to give everybody the opportunity to take advantage of these great tools. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also important for our policymakers to understand that, other countries are investing in this. And if we want to stay globally competitive, we can't just sit back. If you watch that 60-minute segment just last night about, some of the sort of science Olympics that takes place and the number of countries from Asia versus the United States, the teams from different schools. In fact, the one school I think from the top 10 was from Georgia, Marcia Lambert, I think it was. So that's, it's wonderful, but it's just that you look at the percentage of GDP that's invested by other countries in their infrastructure, and again, technology is part of that. That we can't sit back if we want to remain globally competitive.
Indeed. We want to be the leaders. That's always our goal, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So let's talk for a minute. There's still an opportunity if you would like to put a question in the Q&A box, but I'm going to go back to a couple of the other questions that we had for our speakers until I see some more questions coming in. So, how do you see the role of technology evolving in infrastructure over the next 5 to 10 years? I'd like to hear briefly from each one of you. Amy, do you want to start?
Um, Sure. I think obviously AI will be a tool that we all get to leverage in terms of producing more efficient and productive work. But I would say that one of the outcomes I'm hoping for with the use of all this technology is just that we get a workforce that's excited to be part of the industry because they're able to do their best work aided by some of these tools, and that our projects are again more sustainable and more resilient, and they're able to be built in ways that are less disruptive for the population that is going to experience them.
Oh, great. Great answer. Jay, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I echo Amy's input on AI. What I see over the next 5 years, I mean, definitely there's going to be a huge shift from a collection of tools into a more connected end-to-end digital ecosystem. So instead of teams like working in isolated applications, we'll probably see more of the common data environments becoming a standard practice where information flows more continuously across planning, design, and construction. I think we're going to see more of integrated models like 4D linking to schedule and cost to get better control over schedule, cost, and risk. And then definitely a stronger connection between digital design and operations through digital twins. Projects right now, we see a lot of them stop being digital at construction turnover. And then that same data will definitely increase, support for operations, maintenance, and long-term planning. So yeah, real-time visibility into construction progress, asset condition will become more common as sensors and field data and models are more connected. So definitely a more integrated and end-to-end ecosystem is definitely where it's headed. Again, AI, what Amy mentioned. So.
Great. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to
Yeah,
add to that?
I would just echo. I certainly see the integration and again the systems approach that we've talked about earlier. As we looked at our Future World Vision project, we looked at all these different trends that we saw across the world and what we thought are how it's going to impact different scenarios that we saw evolving. And one of the trends that we were focusing in on was smart cities. And many cities are now building out these sensor networks and a host of applications to collect data, to make decisions and monitor services. And I see that more and more that we're going to see for transportation and energy and utilities and public safety and municipal services and even citizen engagement. So I think we're going to see more and more of that, and I think we're all going to be better off as a consequence.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to toss a question out here that came from our audience. It's interesting timing for the question because I listened to an online lecture yesterday from a very famous um, uh, computer scientist in California, Lily, and talking about world models. So, what steps are needed to facilitate the understanding and the use by civil engineers of these so-called world models that are powered by 3D spatial data, as opposed to what we've seen in the past, the historic use of two-dimensional models? Any thoughts on that?
Could you repeat the question? What is
Oh,
what?
yeah. What
Sorry.
steps are needed to facilitate more understanding by the civil engineering community of these world models, these 3D spatial data-based models? What do you think is going to be essential? And I guess, something like a Revit model is a toe in the water for those kinds of models that I think the audience is thinking about.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. One of the things we often talk about is, a lot of the LLMs are creating images. They might look like 3D, but they're a 2D picture, right? It's not a building or even like a vase or a piece of machinery that understands what it is, or let alone a road, bridge, or highway. So there's this continuing evolution in the LLMs, and they're getting smarter and smarter, but they're still effectively kind of horizontal things. Not in the way that a road is horizontal, but in the way that it's kind of generic. And so what we see is there's a place for, vertical AI and vertical intelligence to be married with these LLMs so that when you look at a real 3D spatial data or model, you're able to understand the context that you need, the civil context or the building context, and you can still leverage the LLM, but you're kind of flavoring it with additional information. That might be through an MCP server on some of our capabilities. There's a lot of new ways where kind of vertical AI is coming to fruition that is really at the early stages, I think. And I don't know, Jay, you might be experiencing some of this in your company where you could get pretty par with the generic LLM, but then all of a sudden you hit a wall where you're like, okay, now I need something that understands my context better.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if we exactly if we take a step back, the whole evolution of 3D modeling started from visualizing something, a design in 3D, but then with the rise of BIM, it became more about the information behind the 3D models. That said, every discipline has its own application. So on any given infrastructure program, you have applications that are specific to the building itself, to the MEP systems, to the utilities, to the civil, bridge, etc. And that begs the question: how do I pull them all together
Mhm.
and maintain that intelligent information behind it? And it's a paradigm shift that your drawings now are an output from the model rather than the other way around, which means down the road with LLMs, with AI, it's going to transition into a paperless delivery. So no more papers, and all the information that you need to build the project is going to be pulled from that model. And now recently, with all the integrated cloud services and applications that manage that deluge of information with common data environments, it's becoming more data driven, in a 3D based environment that allows people to understand visually better what they're looking at. And I think really visualization is key here, whether it's visualizing the data itself in bars and charts, or just visualizing it as a 3D model, or as an operation and maintenance tool. I mean, it's a wide topic. That's a really great question.
Yeah,
It deserves like a whole webinar by itself.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, Amy, you mentioned three types of or categories of AI use. Um, the third one was systems. Um, does anyone have an any of you have an example um, that you could provide of a systems AI tool or an application?
I'll start. I think, and Jay mentioned some of it. It's sort of like you can imagine maybe the facade of a building, but really we want to start thinking about all the different pieces that go together to make up the building, right? The MEP, the structure, all those pieces. So you might imagine in the future, as AI evolves, that you'd be able to say, I'm building, find me all the elementary schools that we built in the last 5 years, or or bridges of a certain size and form factor. And then, here's my new context in my site. Give me a design that hits all of these requirements, and here's my specification. So that's a place where, because of all the smaller advances, the tasks and the workflows we make in AI, we're actually able to deliver a system to the engineer to then have them, start their part of the design process. So that's kind of what we mean by systems, is sort of multiple things kind of all coming together to do a bigger deliverable.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I think Amy covered it well.
I think she did great.
Thanks. Um, I'm going to pivot back now to the last couple of questions. We have about 8 minutes left, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to answer a couple of questions, and then if you have any closing remarks. So uh, we're going to go in the order of Jay, Amy, then Tom. What advice would you give to a project team that's just starting their digital transformation journey?
That's a great question. I have a lot of advice, but I, I think the most important one is to start with the problem, not the tool. We tend to get lost sometimes with, there's so many great tools out there, and people think that if I use this tool, then it's going to solve my problem. But starting what the problem is, and then going through the process of identifying what is the best tool to use it. I think digital transformation should be driven by real project pain points like rework, coordination, schedule pressure, managing risk, not just by technology for its own sake. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Mm,
I think also getting the data basics right, establishing that common data environment where all the information sits, standardizing naming conventions, structure, make it clear like who owns what information. Because without that foundation, even the best tools will struggle to deliver real value. And then you think holistically beyond only design. Like, you have to take a look at the life cycle of the project, because that same data is going to transition from design to construction, and then later to operation and maintenance. The last one is, I mean, I've seen, like, throughout my experience, is that one common mistake is people try to do too much at the same time, like try to boil the ocean. I think just start small and scale up, like prove it, have a pilot project, one or two workflows, learn what works, what didn't, and then build from there. I think it works best when it grows within the project itself. You see the value in what you did, and then it grows from there, and then you have a great story to tell. And then the last one, I think, just investing in people as much as platforms. Training across disciplines, those digital skill sets, change management. Even I think we're comfortable with the tools that we know. Whenever we have a deadline, we want to revert back to what I know I'm comfortable in this tool, but sometimes they could be a better solution. It's just going to take that extra effort to change my mindset and upgrade my skill set. So,
Right. Thank you for those. Amy, any add-ons to
Well,
that?
that was pretty comprehensive, but I would say one thing I would add is yes, pilot, 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 but find a few champions who really understand the vision of what you're trying to do and have them just, get out there with the people and help them bring them along. But and it's a repetitive process, but some people with some passion will help the things go more smoothly.
hmm and I reflect on what you said, and all the tools we're already comfortable with. At some point in time, they were new to us as well,
Mhm.
and we had to take baby steps till we got proficient in them. So we have to remember those lessons as we move forward. Tom, did you want to add anything?
That was a great list. The only thing I could possibly add would be to engage all the stakeholders on your team, including frontline people. And because there's a lot that people that are users that may not be on your sort of executive team that are involved in a decision like this. But you really need to engage the entire team and really think that through. And I really like the idea of considering, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because I think a lot of times that people put the technology in front of the problem and really don't define the problem first, which is key.
hmm Yeah, and I think with the data tools we have now, sometimes we're learning more about the problem as we go, and it evolves a little bit, and we have to be open to that as well. So, we're teaching and learning simultaneously. So we have just a couple of minutes left. We're going to do a lightning round to close us out. So I'm going to start with Tom to close us out. Why should we be optimistic about the future of U.S. infrastructure?
Well, I think I'll mention you mentioned Revit, and I'll be at a future Discovery Summit later this week, and they put on the Future Cities competition every year, and we use Revit. I got to judge the high school competition, and I think we had over 60,000 students from across the country participate in this, and you get to see the future cities that they're designing. And you start to realize that people are focusing on infrastructure at that level, and that's a pipeline, and that's the future. And there's a lot of real reasons to be pretty optimistic about the future for this country and for engineering when you get to see that.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. Um, Jay, would you like to tell us what you're
sure.
optimistic about?
Well, I'm biased. I'm really optimistic on the delivery side. I mean, I think digital delivery is becoming like a normal practice instead of an exception. We're no longer the digital people that sit on the side and do cool stuff. I think we're more integrated with teams. And I feel like agencies are starting to embrace that data driven decision making process in a much better way. Information is becoming an asset. It's not just a byproduct of construction. And I'm super excited. Like the technology evolution over the past 2 decades has been fascinating. And we started with AutoCAD 10, right? And look at where we
Mhm.
are right now with cloud platforms, digital twins, and AI. They're no longer just concepts. They're really practical
For
tools
real?
to help us manage complexity and risk. And then lastly, I'm really excited about the next generation. I mean, they're stepping in really in a nice way. More digital native engineers are entering the workforce, which is
Right.
amazing. And I think the industry is becoming more multidisciplinary and innovative. Really looking forward to what's next.
Yeah, I wish I were about 40 years younger so I
Right.
could be part of the party. Amy, why don't you bring us home? What are you
Yeah, so to
about?
build on all that, I think one of the things that encourages me a lot is I see so much more collaboration happening across the entire life cycle of a project, from capital planning to design to construction to handover. And it's just, I think we get better answers and better outcomes when we can bring the people with the experience, with the people with the fresh ideas, and everyone together to collaborate on these amazing projects. So I'm very optimistic that we'll get to great outcomes.
Outstanding. And I just have to say, I'm just generally very optimistic. I think the future is very bright. That's one of my favorite taglines. I think so many good things are happening, and we need to stay focused on the good things and keep advancing them. So I want to thank you all very, very much for this great conversation. I want to thank our amazing audience. Had a lot of great questions come in. I appreciate the speakers' answers. I even got a few text messages sending kudos your way. So Great job. And I hope that the audience will join us for future conversations. But thank you so much for this really important discussion on data. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.